Hi, this is Gwen at Reading Closely, and welcome to this first video in my multi-part series on Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, as you might know, The Picture of Dorian Gray is a novel from the late Victorian period in which the portrait of an incredibly handsome man mysteriously changes over time while the man himself remains physically the same. My choice of the novel was prompted in part by this year's Victober Challenge, created by four brilliant booktubers. I'll provide the links to their channels below. And the idea is to encourage the reading of Victorian literature in the month of October. Before I continue, I should say that I am completely new to YouTube. This is in fact my first video ever, and so I hope you'll bear with me as I muddle through. Now, it turns out that Oscar Wilde actually wrote two different versions of this novel in his lifetime. So in this first video, I want to focus on that publication history and how it might affect your choice of which modern edition of the novel to read. In future videos in this series, I will proceed through the reading of the novel itself. So let me begin by just saying a little bit about the editions that I'll be using in this series. First, I have this 2011 edition published by Harvard University Press and edited by Nicholas Frankel. This is a gorgeous book, beautifully produced, lavishly illustrated, and amply annotated. It is billed as the annotated, uncensored edition of the novel, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. But right now I just want to give you a sense of the way it's composed and put together. Here you have, this column is the text of the novel. Over here we have annotations. Here, for example, is a picture of a portrait of Oscar Wilde, and here a caption. In the last year, I've become a big fan of audiobooks. I have a half-hour commute to and from work, and I find that it's wonderful to listen to a book as I drive. So as I was planning to read The Picture of Dorian Gray, I decided to go ahead and download an audio version. So here's my iPad with the image of the Audible edition. It is narrated by Michael Page, who does a fabulous job. Really slips into all of the different characters and their voices beautifully. I've gained a lot of appreciation for the performing artists who create these audible books, and he does a really wonderful job. It's published by Brilliance Audio, and again, it's, I guess, distributed, I suppose you could say, by Amazon through their Audible collection. I'm so glad that I did this, because what I've realized as in the process of acquainting myself with both of these editions is that they are actually very different. This first version is based on the very first version that Oscar Wilde sent to his editor at Lippincott magazine, and the editor then cut about 500 words, apparently of a too explicit homosexual nature. And so this version restores those 500 words. The audio version that I got represents a later stage, about a year later, in 1891, when Oscar Wilde decided to expand the work. And instead of the 13 chapters that he originally published in Lippincott magazine, this version now consists of 20 chapters. Now, normally in a case like this, we look at the last edition produced in an author's lifetime as the definitive one, the one that the author wanted to see in print. But there are some exceptions to that. So sometimes it makes sense to look at the original conception, and that is especially the case when something has happened, something significant between the publication of the first and the last version. And that's the case with The Picture of Dorian Gray. And what happened is that when the initial version, that 13 chapter version, novella really, I guess you could say, was published in 1890, it was mercilessly attacked by the critics for reasons that I'll have a little more to say about later. So as Oscar Wilde was working on the expanded version, he had that reaction in the back of his mind, or maybe at the forefront of his mind. Certainly it was on the mind of his publishers, who required him to make certain changes. And it seems very likely that Oscar Wilde also engaged in a kind of self-censorship. Although he tended to be a very extravagant sort of person, he liked to shock people. I think maybe he was realizing that there were limits and that he had to be careful about the degree to which he shocked the British public. Now, I should say these two versions were similar in many ways. They follow the same overall narrative arc. They begin at the same place and they end essentially at the same place. And the progression, what happens in between, is fundamentally the same. But in the second and longer version, it's as if Oscar Wilde has sort of fleshed out the skeleton, and he's added scenes that maybe he intended to enhance the novel, but at the same time we have to remember again that he had in mind the reaction of the public to the first version. And I would say that even in adding material, he might have been engaging in a kind of self-censorship, in that some of the new material seems to sort of normalize what had been perhaps a more subversive story in the first telling. Now, if you'd like to compare the two versions, I'd recommend this Norton Critical Edition, published in 2007 and edited by Michael Patrick Gillespie. In addition to offering both versions of the novel that were released in Oscar Wilde's lifetime, it also includes a section that has the reviews of the novel when it first came out and Oscar Wilde's responses to the reviews. So which modern edition should you choose? I would say that if you feel like reading this novel, you should just read any edition that's out there. There are multiple editions available. I think most of them are probably based on the later 20-chapter version, which is fine. And then if you're interested in learning more about it, you can delve into it more deeply by going online or by finding other editions as well. In this video series, I will be delving in more deeply, beginning in a couple of weeks when I want to take a close look at the preface of the novel. In the video after that, I plan to do a close reading of the first several chapters, and then I will pick up the pace and go through the remaining chapters. Again, I want to say this is my very first video. I hope you will forgive the many mistakes I've made in terms of the filming and the editing. I will undoubtedly have some afterthoughts and perhaps corrections, which I will put in the description box below. And I really welcome your comments, your advice, both on the filming and the editing, and also your thoughts on the novel. So that's it for today, and I hope to be back in a couple of weeks.